¿Podemos empezar, porfa? Intérpretes, ¿estáis preparados para la acción? Vale, pues vamos a empezar porque tenemos una sesión muy importante, pero no muy larga, porque tenemos aquí a unos y a unas oradoras muy buenos y luego tenemos un público excelente que también tiene que poner cuestiones y plantear. No translation, vale, it's not a problem. I can translate me to you. Tú me entiendes todo.
Sí, me entiendo su español. Sí.
Él entiende español mejor que yo inglés, bastante mejor.
Es el idioma internacional.
Sí, es el idioma nuestro. Entonces, bueno, yo quisiera primero presentarme, puesto que tengo que introducir y moderar este debate. Bueno, me llamo Maite Mola. Muchas y muchos de vosotros me conocéis ya porque he venido muchas veces a las universidades y a los festivales que prepara el Partido del Trabajo 2006 aquí en Hungría, pero bueno, a otras y a otros no os conozco. Deciros que soy española, vasca, del Partido Comunista de España y también de Izquierda Unida. Estamos en la coalición Unidas Podemos. Tenemos elecciones en España muy importantes el 28 de mayo y estamos, bueno, pues muy volcados en eso. Y quiero agradecer muchísimo al Foro Europeo por la invitación a este evento.
And I apologize, so I hope you can hear me now. My name is Maite Mola. I represent the European left. I want to thank also the work of the interpreters who have a very hard work ahead of them if we don't give them our presentations ahead. So I thank them for their work. And I am the moderator of this discussion, and I would like to introduce my fellow speakers next to me here on the stage. And after the wonderful discussions during the morning sessions, we will talk about proposals, namely about what we progressive forces can do in order to take up the fight against fascism and against the extreme right. In my short introduction, I want to share a few things with you. I have about 10 minutes. I want to underline something that has already been said during the morning session. The question of education, the education against fascism, against Nazism, it's something that we have to introduce at a very early age, at the early school years. We have to teach our children about our common values from a very early age. And today we've heard about this in the morning. I think this is one of the proposals that we can add into the afternoon session as well. We have to work on this in all our countries. The 8th of May is a national holiday in many countries, many European countries. That is celebrating the end of the Second World War, or an important event of the Second World War. But this should also be a national holiday as the 8th of March or the 1st of May. I think they have a universal, general, global holiday and celebration that should be acknowledged all around the world, because it's not only about the end of the Second World War, but the defending democracy and victory over fascism. I think if we want to establish a report at the end or some sort of conclusion, I think it's important that we should include this point in that conclusion, that the 8th of May should be considered as a global celebration, since it is a victory over fascism, is a victory of peace. And I want to talk about peace a little bit more. The interventions of the Chinese or the Brazilian presidents, nobody talks about them as great communist leaders, because even though these are countries that work for the same things, the same aim, namely to end this war. They have proposals. We also have to have proposals. We have to preserve our multi-pluralism. We are not talking about two celebrities with the two presidents, but we have to talk about two major countries in global powers who represent the same idea. And I think that their messages have to be heard, and their unity is important, and the unity of the left is also important. I think that if the progressive left forces could be united here in Europe as well, it would take us a long way, and this is why we are here. I think that many of you know the president of Cuba, who says that there is unity in pluralism or unity in diversity. And this is an important idea, important principle. We talked about the fight against fascism. We talked about the fight for peace and the fight for environmental protection. And although I'm from the left, I am not able to solve this problem just by myself. It is without a doubt that we have to do something about NATO as well. But if after this war is ended or will be ended, if we will not dissolve NATO, then there will be another war that will break out, which they are already preparing for with Taiwan. So I think these are issues that we have to be focusing on. I think that anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism should be issues that we should all get behind, should be universal and global issues that we fight for. And we often say that we want Europe, but a different kind of Europe. We have to establish that different kind of Europe. In the European model, it is key to be aware of the fact that in Latin America, they were able to do something that we have not been able to do so far, to create the majority of forces get behind a progressive idea, and we have to somehow establish a model that is similar to the Latin American movement. So this was what I wanted to say as an introduction, and with this I give the floor to my friend and colleague Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy, for being here.
Friends, thank you very, very much for inviting me here today. And I want to say thank you to all those that have organised this very important conference. And it's wonderful to be here with you all, and particularly with Walter, who's done so much to help us develop the European left and develop that sense of unity across our continent of people of the left, the anti-racist, anti-fascist organisations as well. And because they're so often forgotten, could I just ask you all to thank our interpreters for making the whole thing possible? They're in the booths at the back there. Without them, nothing would be possible. I'd also just say that my wife, Laura Alvarez, is here. She's sitting on the front row. She spoke earlier today, and she does the international work for the Peace and Justice Project. And we've just been joined by my son Tommy and Artin Giles, who also works for the Peace and Justice Project. Tommy is in Budapest celebrating the first 30 years of his life here. Now I've fulfilled every father's occupation of embarrassing their children. The conference has quite rightly emphasised the question of history and of unity of our people in opposing the rise of fascism and opposing the rise of militarism and the dangers of war on our continent. I'm sure everyone in this room is well aware of the incredible work done by Rosa Luxemburg, by Juarez, by Karl Liebknecht, by Sylvia Pankhurst in Britain, and of course Keir Hardie, who was originally the leader of the Labour Party, who died during the First World War. And I've often thought that so many of the current generation growing up have no idea who these people are. There's a metro station in Strasbourg named Juarez. I don't think anyone going through that station has got a clue as to why it is called that. And so when a call was made earlier that we think more seriously about the teaching of history, that is so important. And it can be made popular, it can be made interesting, it can be made personalised. But the life of Sylvia Pankhurst, the life of Rosa Luxemburg, are something that needs to be brought into reality for the current struggles that we face at the present time. The rise of racism and fascism across Europe is very obvious. It's in front of our eyes all the time. Now, when you say to some people, the fascists are rising again, they say, well, no, there's no fascists around. Well, fascism doesn't necessarily arrive in a tank or an armoured personnel carrier wearing jackboots and carrying a machine gun. It's also lawfare against the left. It is also anti-racist mentality in our media. It is also the growth of a lack of respect and even toleration of diversity within our society. The monoculture argument that is being advanced by Viktor Orban and others is a very, very dangerous step towards racism all across Europe, and we have to be very well aware of that. The numbers of refugees around the world is now over 70 million. 70 million people are refugees. They are people who've had to leave their homes because of human rights abuse, because of social exclusion, because of environmental disasters, and in particular because of war. The month before, I went to Calais on the coast of France to meet the people who are, we are told by the British media, a dangerous marauding army who are trying to invade Britain from Calais. That's the language they use. I'll give you an example of the craziness of this language. There's been a small outbreak of a very serious illness called diphtheria in part of England, in Kent. Our popular media said, in terms, in quotes, diphtheria outbreak caused by illegal migration to Britain. There's no evidence whatsoever to support this, a complete invention, but designed to build up hatred. I went to Calais and I met people who are attempting to cross the Channel to go to Britain. They were young, they were usually alone, very poor, very confused, and very frightened. And every time food was taken to them from the volunteer kitchen, the police stopped the vehicles taking the food to spend several hours examining the documentation of those vehicles. When water bowsers, that's a tank for water, were placed where the refugees might get some water to drink, the police and the far right go round putting a knife into those tanks to make sure the water seeps out and they go starving and thirsty on the streets. And where were the people from that I met? Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Eritrea, Senegal, Congo, Eritrea, and so on. every single country where there's either a war or an environmental disaster, and for all the billions that were put into the war in Afghanistan by Britain, the USA, and NATO, it is now the poorest country in the world with the worst record on human rights and the most repressive government possible. That is a product of 20 years of Western occupation of Afghanistan. And so we've got to think about this and how we deal with that narrative. Last Saturday, I addressed a May Day rally in the town of Hastings on the south coast of Britain. It's a town that has a very strong radical tradition. Indeed, one of our great socialist works, The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropist, was based on the town of Hastings, and in that book it's called Mugsborough. And we had a rally, we had a march and a meeting. But what was great about it was that the people there were practically welcoming and helping people who came on these dangerous small boats to the coast, giving them food, giving them support, and giving them comfort, and getting a lot of human support from people in the town. So it was the left, by its practical actions, showing that they were prepared to support and welcome refugees. And when people say to me, well, there's too many refugees coming, I say, well, actually, in my country, we're short of doctors, we're short of nurses, we're short of engineers, we're short of teachers, we're short of electricians, we're short of plumbers. Tomorrow, when you go to the hospital, those very same people will be treating you in the hospital as they are in hospitals all across Europe. So let us have a positive attitude, both towards the individual seeking asylum in our society, but some understanding of why people seek asylum, not this disgusting populist attack on desperate, vulnerable people, which is what is going on all across Europe at the present time. World War II was absolutely the abyss of the rise of fascism in Europe, based on the use of anti-Semitism by the Nazis in the 1920s and onwards, building on centuries of anti-Semitism, which too often was not challenged at the time. They used that to gain power in Germany, and we know what happened after that. So as we celebrate the defeat of the fascists on Victory Day, it's very important to understand the social conditions that allowed for and brought about the rise of the far right and fascism in Germany. Yes, they used anti-Semitism. They also attacked the LGBT community. They also attacked the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community. They also attacked the then very small black community in Germany. They attacked any visible group or minority and used that in order to gain power, and we know what happened as a result of that. But we now have a situation across Europe where, in the case of my country, wage levels are falling, public services are underfunded, and the levels of poverty are increasing. There are now more food banks in Britain than there are branches of McDonald's. These are food banks which provide free food for people that desperately need it. And yet our country managed to spend £1 billion on the coronation yesterday. I sent out a tweet pointing out the levels of poverty in my country, and it's, as of now, had over 2 million people look at it and read it since we sent that out yesterday. So there is a thirst for some kind of alternative politics. But it means that we have to be much better at communication and much better at the use of media. Yes, our mainstream media is controlled by Rupert Murdoch, on his behalf by Fox News, and it's controlled by a sense of belief, self-belief by the most right-wing media that they can set what the political discourse should be. We have to have an alternative, both by challenging them in the mainstream media, but also standing up for real journalists like Julian Assange, who's been 4 years in prison in Britain. For what crime? Exposing the truth about the US war machine around the world. And so it is about developing our own alternative. And one of the speakers this morning quite rightly said that we should be cautious about Facebook and all the others. In reality, we communicate with each other because some very big businesses in California allow us to. We need our own secure alternative form of communication and information being sent to each other. The legal attacks that are taking place against the left at the moment and against the Assembly are huge. In the case of Britain, the government has introduced a new immigration law which will mean that anyone coming, in their words, illegally to our shores will be immediately removed to Rwanda, where they will be placed there in detention and their application processed. It's very unclear what would happen to them after that in Rwanda. It has been challenged. It was challenged effectively by the European Court of Human Rights, and the response of the British government is to try to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights and indeed ultimately to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, I'm a member of the Council of Europe, where we elect the judges, and we are in a sense the custodians of the European Convention on Human Rights. It is a very serious attack, and if Britain gets away with its attack on the European Court of Human Rights, I can think of plenty of other governments across Europe that would want to do exactly the same. It's not the European Union, it's the European Convention on Human Rights established after the Second World War. But also the British government has passed anti-demonstration laws in Britain, which were used yesterday to arrest a whole lot of people who turned up in London to give an alternative view to the coronation and the monarchy being established, well, it is established in Britain. So I just think it's important that we stand up for our right of journalists, our right to know, and our civil liberties at the same time. And so there are alternatives around the world. There are alternatives in this room. There are alternatives in every one of our countries. We don't win as a left, as socialists, as anti-racists, as environmentalists, as human rights campaigners if we place ourselves in an isolated box. It's comfortable sitting in a box with half a dozen of your friends. It's a lovely place to be. You can meet, you can always agree on everything, and you go away and you've changed nothing. It is about building a serious, big campaign to bring about unity of purpose of what we're trying to achieve. I was in Brazil for the elections in Colombia and for the elections in Brazil. I was also there for the inauguration of President Boric in Chile earlier on. And what I noticed in Colombia in the first round was that the biggest proportion of voting was young women voting. In the second round, fortunately, they were joined by the young men, and Petro won the election, and we now have a much better government in Colombia. Lula, who won in Brazil eventually by 1%, 1% is a lot of votes in Brazil, it's a very big country, but it was still only 1%, won by, only a few years ago was in prison for 500 days on a trumped-up charge of lawfare against him on allegations, spurious and disgusting allegations of corruption. His party and his friends stood by him, and he won the case eventually, came out, and then was re-elected as president. But what I noticed in the campaigning was the brutality and financing of the right campaign of Bolsonaro, but also I noticed the total support for him in the working class communities and the poorest people in Brazil. And he didn't run a campaign of conceding ground to the economic arguments of the right, the free market economics and so on. He won by saying, we will unite the people of Brazil, whatever their language, whatever their color, whatever their religion. We'll unite the people of Brazil to end poverty, to protect our natural world and environment, and provide hope and jobs for the next generation. And so I think the victories in Latin America, for all the problems that go with them, are a source of inspiration for all of us. And we need to be doing the same internationally across Europe. It means taking on difficult issues, like calling for, as, who am I to question him, the Pope and others that have called for a ceasefire in the Ukraine as a start of a peace process. Every war ends round a conference table. Why don't we cut out the fighting and go straight to the conference table and save lives of Ukrainians, of Russians, of refugees that are coming, and recognise the future of our world hasn't to be built on bigger military alliances and militarism. It has to be built on peace and social justice and environmental sustainability. I'm being hinted at that my time is nearly up, so I just want to say this in conclusion. In our country, as you know, there have been big political changes since, sadly, we lost the 2019 election. And whilst I was personally pilloried by the media in that election, and the most violent and disgusting things were said about me as the leader of our party, two things have happened. One is, none of us have gone away. We're still there arguing for socialism, for peace, anti-racism, and justice within our society. And secondly, every single one of the policies we put forward on public ownership, on environmental sustainability, on giving hope and opportunity to young people, developing a free education service, remain immensely popular policies. And so we are supporting those people that are standing up against the system, such as Lula, Petro and others, but also Ada Colau in her campaign for re-election as the mayor of Barcelona, and so many others. And our project, the Project for Peace and Justice, which we set up after the last election, has made 5 simple demands which we think people can unite around, and I'll give them very quickly. 1, a real pay rise for all, at least inflation-level pay rises. That is what's brought about the strikes at the present time. 2, democratic public ownership of our public services. The water companies in Britain have poured sewage into our rivers on 300,000 occasions last year. Thirdly, housing for all. Young people get no housing of their own, are forced to rent and spend up to half their income merely on paying rent in the private rented sector. Not unusual. It happens in every single city across Europe, and I'm sure absolutely even here in Budapest. 4th, taxation to pay for services. Our National Health Service, our proudest achievement in our country's history, healthcare free at the point of need as a human right, is under threat, as Laura said this morning, by privatisation and by systematic destruction of it. Tax the rich, end the tax havens in order to pay for public services. And so the top 5% should pay more. Our government has this crazy trickle-down idea which Reagan and Thatcher put forward. You make the rich very rich and some or other would all get jobs cutting their lawns, and it will make us rich in the future. It's a crazy idea. And the last point, to introduce people to the idea of internationalism and social justice, is welcome refugees, for tomorrow they will be our neighbours, and build a world of peace and understanding and end the global inequalities by also much better teaching of history within our schools. It's up to us to deliver a world fit for the next generation. That is what brings us together. That is where our enthusiasm should be. Create that world of peace and justice that the young people may inherit, not a world of fear, poverty, and the brutality of free market economics. Thank you.
Bueno, Jeremy, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you not only for this wonderful speech, but thank you also for having been able to summarize in 20 minutes so many different aspects. Often we see that politicians speak for hours, trying to summarize very complex topics, but I see that you have been a trade union member for a long time and you have the ability to express yourself in a concise way. So I would like to tell and ask the colleagues who will speak next that they will have 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes, I will let them know that their time is up. I apologize in advance, but we would like to provide the sufficient time for everyone to ask questions and comment on what you have heard. Eleonora is a colleague who is she's a member of the Italian Communist Party, and she has been for years a member of the European Parliament. She is now part of the Secretariat of the European Left Party, and also she's working as a university professor, a high school teacher. I think it's even more interesting than being a professor at a university.
Thank you. I want to thank the European Progressive Forum for organizing this conference and for inviting me to speak on such an important topic for the future of Europe. I will speak about the most right-wing government in Italian Republican history and about the risk that this government being a laboratory for Europe. From the Italian laboratory, the connection between the post-fascist and neo-fascist right is unfortunately very clear. Italy was a dramatic laboratory in the 1920s. We must fight together to prevent it from being a laboratory for the future of Europe in 2020s. We must avoid the concrete risk that the next European Parliament will be characterized by a right-wing majority that puts into practice the idea not of a Europe of peoples, but of nations, and that the so-called Black International of Meloni and Orban could write the future of Europe. Historical fascism in Italy turned out to be a tragic autobiography of the nation, as the anti-fascist Piero Gobetti defined it, different from the philosopher Benedetto Croce, who considered fascism a parenthesis in the ethical political history of Europe. The Italian government today presents those features of eternal fascism of which the philosopher Umberto Eco spoke about: cult of tradition, fear of differences, contempt for pacifism, machismo. Some example: pervasive use of the word nation, change of the name of the ministries, naval blockade proposal against migrant people, denunciation of the risk of ethnic replacement due to the falling of birth rate. In a few months, 3 bills for the recognition of life from conception have been filed, and the Minister for the Family has publicly said that abortion is unfortunately a right recognized in Italy. They want to transform women into incubators of the nation, as in the fascism. For the reason also, we can consider feminism the most radical antidote to any form of post and neo-fascism. As Umberto Eco noted, fascism is very syncretic. It was capable to shift from atheism to Catholicism, and the same syncretism is typical of contemporary far-right, as we can know, for instance, in the shifting of Giorgia Meloni from anti-EU to a Euro-Atlantism supporting. David Broder, author of the recent Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy, agrees with a syncretic interpretation of the actual Italian post-fascist right, capable of reinventing itself, rooted in historical fascism, yet claiming to have transcended it. Quoting, "Fascist tradition has always been syncretic. Today, it's merging with other kinds of conservative and right-wing forces, as we see also internationally. For example, the Great Replacement theory. They are trying to bind the idea of fascists as a victimized minority in post-war Italy, and to link it with the victim identity of countries that have been under the communists for a long time, such as Hungary, to evoke emotion and to gain support from other countries that may not have the same history as Soviet tanks. Indeed, one of the reasons why the right has established itself is the weakening of anti-fascism in the common sense. This is also one of the dramatic consequences of a long season of historical revisionism, or we can say the reversal of reversal of history, as the historian Angelo Dorsi writes, for which there is a constant attempt to rewrite the history of the Italian resistance, 25th of April, for instance. But historical revisionism has also been pursuing an institutional strategy for some time, and not only in Italy. The European Union, as might remember, celebrate its celebration on May the 9th, the anniversary of Schumann's declaration. No relations with the victory against Nazi fascism. Yet, the Ventotene Manifesto was written when Spinelli was in a fascist confinement. And the Day of Victory over Fascism should be celebrated as a foundation by the whole EU and not considered a celebration of Russian nationalism, of Putin's authoritarianism and its military parades. I think we should fight in the European Parliament to restore the meeting of the 8th and 9th May. Another example of institutional revisionism was the approval of the resolution on the importance of the European remembrance for the future of Europe. And the equation, of Nazism and communism, that is a classic of revisionism, to which unfortunately not only the right but also sectors of social democracies contributed in the past. The resolution, considered the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact the cause of the Second World War and not the Hitlerism and so on. The 2019 resolution is very different from the one passed in 2018. The resolution on the rise of neo-fascist violence in Europe, approved in 2018. Why? In September 2018, when I was a member of the European Parliament, together with other demonstrators, I suffered a squad attack by some members of the neo-fascist organization Casa Pound at the end of an anti-racist demonstration held in Bari, my city. 2 people, including my parliamentary assistant, were seriously injured. The trial against those members of Casa Pound is now underway, both for aggression and for the reconstitution of the fascist party, prohibited in Italy, by the Italian Constitution. Just a few days ago, I testified in the trial, which I hope will help to outlaw Casa Pound, as happened for Golden Dawn in Greece. But the judicial route cannot be enough in the fight against neo-fascist organization. We need politics inside and outside the institution. Immediately after the attack in 2018, I promoted a resolution on the increase of neo-fascist violence in Europe. The approval of that resolution was possible thanks to the cooperation between 3 feminists, me in the GUE-NGL, Anna Miranda in the Greens, and Soraya Post in Social and Democrats, who I want to thank once again. It was a demonstration of the feminist power against all fascism and a good example of cooperation between left, green, and progressive forces. I think it's very important to fight, to use and implement the resolution that deplores the collusion between political leaders, political parties, and law enforcement with neo-fascists and neo-Nazis, and urges to effectively ban neo-fascist and neo-Nazis groups and any other foundation or association that exalts and glorifies Nazism and fascism, while respecting domestic legal order and jurisdiction. Following that resolution, we must support research projects and networks, such as Anti-Fascist Europe, powered by Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. That resolution drew also a map of neo-fascist organizations in Europe. And, for instance, the resolution approved mentioned explicitly the far-right groups in Ukraine, such as the Azov-affiliated National Militia, right sector, and others that have attacked Roma groups several times. I'm quoting from the resolution, as well as anti-fascist demonstration, city council meetings, and events hosted by Amnesty International and art exhibition, LGBTQI events, women's rights, and environmental activists. What happens now? The war in Ukraine is further worsening the situation to the advantage of the European right. not only because militarism, military spending, bellicose rhetoric, gender roles are on the rise, but because it restores a Western suprematism against Eastern authoritarianism, the us and them, the friend-enemy logic. Berlinguer, the former secretary of the Italian Communist Party, criticized the Soviet Union and defended democracy as a universal value. Today, in the mainstream media, we talk about democracy as a Western value. But can a Europe that has elected the heads of battalion as a defender of European freedom be called anti-fascist? Who is silent on the links between banderism and Euromaidan? Who doesn't ask for truth and justice for the Odessa massacre? As brother noticed, the momentum of the Atlanticist far right has been boosted by Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this also favors improved relation between the European People's Party and the European Conservatives and Reformists, ECR. This has also led to a new idea in Italy that a so-called center-right coalition should govern Europe, particularly in the European Commission, strengthening the National Conservatism Conference and the Morawiecki strategy, the Polish government. When I went to Donbass as a map, together with the anti-fascist caravan, I saw the destruction caused by a removed war, which began in 2014. Before the criminal Russian invasion, the EU legitimized the Euromaidan, approved free trade agreements with Ukraine, despite the presence of banderists and the corruption of Poroshenko's entourage, and kept silent about the missing respect of Minsk I and Minsk II agreements. I believe that the European left must work, and all the progressive forces must work for an immediate ceasefire, for an international peace conference, for a political and diplomatic role for the European Union, which otherwise is destined to be a military appendage of NATO. Finally, anti-fascism runs the risk of being emptying of its meaning if it is not connected to a social agenda, to a perspective of liberation, of a new liberation of the European popular classes from neoliberalism, European minimum wage, European minimum income, self-determination of women and LGBT people, the end of Fortress Europe and Asylum Europe are essential points of an anti-fascist agenda today. Drop weapons, raise wages and earths.
Muchas gracias, Eleonora.
Thank you, Eleonora. Unfortunately, we have very little time. This was a passionate, short presentation. And I think these two speeches have given us food for thought. So now I would like to ask Attila, as president of the Hungarian Labour Party, to take the floor when you want. You can also invite these excellent speakers to other events so that they can continue this wonderful debate. Thank you also for having invited them, and let me give you the floor right now. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I think it's incredibly important that we can organize this conference in Budapest, because we have to show that Budapest is not only a gathering place for the extreme right. You cannot appropriate Budapest for violent, extreme right, fascist ideologies, because Budapest means a lot more. For us, it's a wonderful city. Usually I tell my friends it's a wonderful city with an awful government. And recently, unfortunately, we have gotten used to the fact that extreme right organizations organize conferences. And I think that just a few days ago, there was a conference organized in Budapest by Americans linked to Donald Trump. And what can I say? There were a few very interesting ideas that were mentioned. I would just like to quote a few things. Obviously, Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has also did also take the floor, because how could he not do so when it's such a conference to his liking? He said Hungary is the laboratorium where they have found the antidote to progressive liberalism. I would like to highlight that he used the word lab. He likes to play lab everywhere, and even in our country, he thinks that progressive dominance needs an antidote. Well, of course, Donald Trump did not want to fall behind, so he sent a video to play at this conference. He didn't travel to the conference, but he did send a video, and his personal message was, as you very well know, we are fighting a historical battle against communists everywhere in the world. We are fighting barbarians who want to destroy our freedom, our traditions, and everything that we hold dear. Well, this is the challenge that we are facing. We need also to fight this global battle. Of course, Donald Trump wants to fight communists because he thinks we are threatening his freedom. Well, I think that this conference that we are having here is a good answer for us to prove that freedom is not about a few politicians or multi-billionaires who can access that. It's the right of entire nations. And these nations are exactly the victims of these billionaires, multi-billionaires, and politicians, because these people basically exploit us and push us back in the sea. And this is what we need to fight against, and this is what we do fight against. The speeches that we have heard today did react to these topics. I would just like to focus on one thing. The new model or the new politics that currently is being developed in these labs, be it in Italy or in Hungary, well, this is not new. This is a new interpretation of some old trash, so to speak. We can find new slogans and new mottos. We can, so to speak, renovate it and revive it, but this is old as history itself. It's about the story that the most affluent participants of or parts of society want to keep their power, even at the cost of cooperating with Nazis or neo-fascists. And we have seen examples in the US while Donald Trump was in power, and we see this in Hungary under the reign of Orbán. For example, he said that the Hungarian government welcomes extreme right, neo-Nazi and neo-fascist events. For example, marches celebrating the SS. Every February in Budapest, they hold this march, and unfortunately they do this, even though they have met significant opposition, and we are proud. We are very proud of this. The Hungarian anti-fascists have acted, and this year the march for the SS was not as incident-free as before, but every year they are going to continue doing this if we don't give an adequate answer to this.
An employee of the Ministry of Interior in Hungary is implied in a scandal of data management of anti-fascists. This is not something that is new. It's something that we've seen several times. There is a criminal investigation, namely to and these that they have been actually preparing lists about anti-fascists as a retribution for our so-called attack on them, that we speak up against these people. And suddenly there has been some sort of government-related initiative in which there are anti-fascist organizations and members of the organizations who are put on a list and their data gathered without consent. So I think they've also tried to connect unfortunate street incidents. There was a conflict between anti-fascists and fascists, and they have actually mistakenly arrested an anti-fascist activist girl, alleging that she's been involved in some sort of violent street conflict, and it's only been weeks or months later that they were unable to prove it, and she was released and discharged. But it's still a warning sign that we see that these menacing steps that they take in order to blur the lines between anti-fascism and violence, which is totally uncalled for. And then there are these people, the fascists, the neo-Nazis, who are still in Budapest. They wanted to organize their congress or some sort of event in downtown Budapest. Eventually they went to somewhere further from the outskirts of the city. This is basically some sort of martial art training camp in which they do these violent fighting trainings in martial arts for among themselves, and I think this is something that we should also step up against, and we have to protest this. And I think that unfortunately Viktor Orban and also the liberal representatives, we sometimes see examples when they do not they actually consider cooperating and working together with extreme right organizations or extreme right politicians. There are politicians who are willing to look away when there are cases, proven cases of certain politicians who do the Nazi salute, and then later on they somehow prefer the profits that can be gained from cooperating on a political level. And I think that this is something that should be completely rejected. We cannot have any political success that has been done with the support of the extreme right. The reason why we are here, our main objective is to eradicate, is to abolish extreme ideologies and extreme right ideologies. So it's something that we cannot stomach. And another thing that I've already highlighted in the morning session is the importance of education. We have to somehow establish some sort of cooperation in education. We need maybe an international coordination center that could help us somehow coordinate the work, this challenge, this project, that we somehow manage to have historical knowledge, the education in historical knowledge being upped to a level so that our younger generations are all aware of our histories and of the historical facts and what led to the rise of fascism in the 20th centuries that we see now replicated in tendencies in our presence, and that which is why it should be important that we know what the challenge is at hand, and we can avoid another chapter, another dark chapter in this century. And that's why we have to shape the thinking, the knowledge, the minds of the young generations, and we can ensure their education, which will facilitate or make it possible for us to organize resistance and so that we can build the movement and unify our global left ideas and activities. So thank you very much for this conference. I think it's a very important forum. I'm very happy to be partake in this, and I'm also very happy that later in the press conference we will also be able to share our precious ideas. Thank you. And I also want to add that in Spain there is an anti-fascist movement that has been organized last year, in which the European left and the European Forum were also participants. And I don't know if the anti-fascist conference could be a point of connection or something, a building block to what Attila was talking about. So how we can explore avenues of cooperation for the future on a global level. I'm wearing a T-shirt about the end of the Spanish Civil War. We see two female figures, and it's just to represent these ideas also in the anti-fascist conference that have these global ambitions as well. I think it should be maybe a good opportunity for us to connect. And now I want to give the floor to Tibor Sanyi, who is representing the Solidarity Party. Thank you very much. And I also want to join all the words of gratitude. I'm very thankful and happy to be here, and it's not just a formality. I really am happy to be here, and I personally want to thank Walter for taking on this challenge of organizing this current event, and Lena, who's contributed a lot for this event to be held in Budapest today. And thank you, Jeremy, as well. Just believe me, we're not used to be so many at a Sunday afternoon in a room, so it's in a great part thanks to your presence. And I also want to thank Attila, who's been also taking the lion's share in organizing this this event. And thank you for all the friends and comrades here, all the organizations who are represented here. I think it's very important and symbolic that we could gather at this Sunday specifically, and I think we have to admit it's not an easy thing to implement, to have so many people be present in a Sunday afternoon. It's also the International Mother's Day, and I think it's specifically the reason why we couldn't be even more present here today, because I think many of us have their priorities with the families and being with their mothers who might not be in Budapest. But I also want to thank their support as well. And just one public service announcement. I think it wouldn't be just if we didn't thank the president of the anti-fascist organization so there's Vilmos who will join us later on, but he has some other engagement, so he can only join us later. So it's not just International Mother's Day, it's also the 7th of May. And I think for those who are present, we have to say that we wanted to organize this event for the 8th of May, because this is the symbolic day of the end of World War II. And it's also Europe's Day. So the reason we chose the 7th is for practical reasons, to organize travel, etc. And also I would like to thank all the foreign friends and comrades who came from a foreign country for traveling to Budapest. It's important because Hungary is not just one venue. Hungary is a special venue. It's not very simple to be an anti-fascist here, I have to say. And it's not simple. It's not easy to find the milieu, the fruitful ground for such thoughts here in this country. And just to still stick to history, we use two words, fascism and Nazism, but in Hungary we didn't. There is also a Hungarian variant of this, which is the Aerocross movement and the Horthyism and Szálasi era, which is strictly related to Hungarian history of the 20th century. But I think it's important that we have not reckoned with the fact that there have been 600,000 people who have been deported here without a word, without a blinking of the population. I think we haven't stressed enough that historic shame that this people was watching as their fellow citizens were deported. And they just let it happen. I think this is something that we should reckon with, which would be a necessary starting point for us to be able to move on with our history. Anyway, I think that these. I wouldn't want to be so too optimistic to say that these ideologies from the 1930s and 40s. Of the fascist and Nazi ideologies of the era is something of the past, because I think it's something that is a dormant evil that can be resuscitated at any moment, and it's just waiting around the corner to somehow come back and then rise again. One of my hobbies is astrophysics. It's really just a hobby. I'm not a professional, not an expert. I'm just read in the subject. But there are a lot of news that say that in many galaxies, the conditions for human lives are given and are possible. The basic elements for human survival would be present, and it also raises the question whether some form of life might be also present in these galaxies. I think it's a good analogy for fascism. I mean, if certain elements for the existence of fascism are present, then the question is raised whether fascism can then come to life. And I think that in the kitchen of Viktor Orbán, in the laboratory of Viktor Orbán, these ingredients, these elements are present. It's another question whether he uses the ingredients, whether the chef Orbán uses the ingredients to cook that specific meal, but the ingredients are present. Viktor Kiss in the morning mentioned that fascism is about privileges, and it's an authoritarian system that has to be the grounds for fascism, and I think these are given in Hungary. And it's in Hungary and also in the continent, because we have an authoritarian regime. There are nationalists. There are two nationalist regimes that are at war, because I think that Russia and Ukraine have these nationalist tendencies. And I think the totalitarian tendencies are there in Hungary every day. There are things that are taken away from the people and are nationalized or put in the hands of the state. And I think this is also these tendencies are not also unfortunately far from sometimes from anti-fascist movements and organizations. I mean, I think it's important that we should not drop the ball on also paying attention to what happens in our own organizations, because but we also have to pay attention not to drop the ball on what is happening at the so-called kitchen with all the ingredients that I was referring to. And so I think it's very important that we pay attention and we work on these issues and matters, and that's why it's important that we are here today at this conference. Tamás Kraus was very right to say that the socialists and people on the left should put an equation sign between the anti-fascism and socialism. I mean, yes, I agree that it's a more nuanced question, and I want to add something to that. So, fascism is not only opposing anti-fascism. Fascism, I think the opposite of fascism is solidarity. And I want to mention here again, which is, it loses its original meaning in many languages, that solidarity means that I'm with you, I'm next to you, I'm with you in your fight. That's solidarity. I'm not helping you, I'm with you. It's being together, being in solidarity. And we said that, yes, some say that, yes, what's happening in Spain, what our Spanish comrades are doing, it's their fight, but no, that's not true. What's happening in Spain, that's my fight, and what's happening here, it's the fight of the Spanish as well. So we have to have solidarity, and that's why this initiative is so good, and there is a summer school that we are working on, so it's important to work together. In Hungary, it's one of my big dreams to have the Sunday school. Well, today is Sunday, but maybe we have to, this is the first lesson, but yeah, what Tamás Kraus said that about the university so where intelligent, educated people can go there and just talk about, and also to learn about not just about the cause, but also what does a doctor do, what does a professor do, what does a plumber do, so just to talk about, to share knowledge. If I'm an anti-fascist, it's not belonging to an organization, it is all decided in the head. But we're just issuing these intellectual fights and cause, and then we're just saying it as a mantra. That's not enough. As Jeremy also said, we have to be more active. We have to stick together and act. And to end my presentation, I want to summarize the 5 points that also Jeremy was referring to. It's to take bigger part in economic processes, solving social housing issues, solidarity, and the access to public services. I think these are really the main points that all of the parties that are represented here, I think it's on our priority agenda. There is the question of migration. I think it's a little bit different maybe here on this side of the world, which is also related to fascism. I see that András Schiffer is shaking his head. I'm also happy to hear his comment later on. So the matter of the fact is, in 2015 and 16, the migration crisis was peaking. There were about 2 million people who came from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and other countries in the East, which then each year there were 200,000-300,000 people who were added to that in each year following that time. We don't have specific statistics, but there are 3 to 4 million people who migrated from the conflict zones to the European continent. A lot of them are still attempting to migrate to this continent, or they are still on their way. So it's 3 to 5 million people in which Europe almost lost its mind. We were polarized, we were building walls and fences, while European Union works with a 40,000 of return rate. So they are returning people to their country of origin at a 40%. So we have to say that those who have actually settled down here in Europe, they are working, studying, living here in Europe, are relatively less. However, if we look at the numbers from this year, May, from the Frontex Eurostat, there's 8.1 million Ukrainian refugees registered in European territory, which is multiple times more than we've been hearing about, than the number of people during the refugee crisis. There are tens of thousands of children who are wandering around in Hungary and in Europe as well, and they are exposed to, I don't even want to think about it, what they can be exposed to, what dangers and threats. And we are putting on the blindfold. We are just looking away. We are just blind to all this. We have the directive on temporary protection, which has been created in since 2001. It was created in the 90s, 1992-93, during the Yugoslav war. So there is this directive about temporary protection, which means that in such cases we let in without any formal immigration procedure on a temporary basis. And just by pulling up this directive and solving the problems of 8.1 million people, and on the other hand, or meanwhile, doing this hysteria about 2 million people, what is the difference between the two groups? It's Islam. And I think that Europe has been testing very badly in this regard, because that we say that Christian refugees welcome, but everything else, we don't want that. I think that's very hypocritical, and it's very bad. We should be thinking about that. And just to summarize and to end, I'm very grateful for this conference, and I'm very happy to hear to have heard the previous presenters and the ones after me. And I think we should say no to fascism and yes to solidarity. Thank you.
Bueno, pues como moderadora.
So now, as moderator of the event, I would like to suggest the following. We have very little time left, so I will hand over to 5 people. I know who the first will be. We have a special speaker. I ask you for 1 second of patience. So I will give the floor to 5 people, and then following this, I will open the floor for the panelists. And the question and answer session, we will not have time for that. So right now we have time for 5 people, and then we will hand it back to the panel. After this, if we still have time, we will have the question and answer session. First of all, I give the floor to the representative of the Greens, to Mr. Representative. Following him, our comrade on the side will have the floor, and whoever wants to speak, please let me know now. We will hand the mic over to you. Comrade, the floor is yours. Please use the microphone. Thank you. Originally, I only wanted to react to what Jeremy Corbyn said regarding the global migration crisis, but Attila Tibor has said a few things that motivated me. So first thing I wanted to say is, although Donald Trump only sent a video, Jeremy Corbyn is here with us in person. And this is a coronation after party. We know that they have just coronated the new king in Britain. Attila, back to you. I think, while I know that there is no debate between us regarding the content, but I think the way we use the language might carry some meaning, and I will attempt to speak in very specific terms. So you quoted Donald Trump and Viktor Orban about their fight against progressive, liberal, democratic trends. I think we should not fall in the same trap as the extreme right has fallen into, because when they identify globalists, they talk about an adversary that are also our adversary on the left. But they just use different terms, because progressive ideologies are something that we want to fight as well. And the populist right is actually trying to, stick the left, the global left, to the globalist bloc. Let us not fall into the same trap, and let us not generalize. Let's talk about the anti-fascist tradition. I don't want to talk about whether these notions have been precise or not in 1944 or 45. Of course, tradition is important. Let me go further. I personally am proud that my grandfather was put on the train, and he did get deported into Dachau. I am proud that I did have ancestors who survived that, and they led the opposition, and they were important in that movement. But we can't say and we can't pretend that the whole geopolitical system and situation hasn't changed since then. Of course, the anti-capitalist, anti-fascist tradition is important, but while we have our own goals, and let me refer to the words of Viktor Kish, these traditions and these goals are now have been placed in an anachronistic framework, and we should be careful not to become anachronistic ourselves. This is why I, Tibor, think that it's especially and particularly dangerous, and now the Hungarian comrades will understand why, because both blocs are using the anti-Semitic card with a lot of ease. So we should be careful not to constantly use the anti-Semitic card. Last time it was Viktor Orbán that used this in the election campaign, and before that it was the government of Gyurcsány, so the left-wing government, who used the same to win the elections. I'd like to say three things about the global migration crisis. First of all, I think I am 100% sure that we all agree that humane treatment this is a basic right, a basic human right, independently of their country of origin, and that we will have to say something. We will have to speak against inhumane treatment. And if there is a campaign, a political campaign or a government campaign, a xenophobic campaign, we have to speak against that and act against that. We should also put it on the imaginary table that Hungary, during this war, is accepting refugees and is taking care of them. The second thing I wanted to say is that if we are talking about global migration crisis, and we're not only talking about Europe, because there's Darfur, there's Sudan, if we're talking about this crisis based on a human rights question, we favor imperialism. We end up in a one-way street and allow for the politics of emotion to be basically attached to this anti-migration policy. So we will be grouped together with the so-called progressives, as we use the term in the sense of the Hungarian word. And I think that this leads us to three questions, and this is why I'm saying that this global migration crisis, we must have a leftist criticism. We have to ask the question, who will restore peace in the failed states? If we speak of Libya, Burkina Faso, Tunisia, Senegal, or Ukraine, the question is the same. Once the war is over, who will provide acceptable living conditions in Ukraine, in Sudan, Somalia, or in any other country. Another question, the countries of origin, and now I'm thinking of Congo in specific, became countries of origin because the countries of the center and their global multinationals are robbing these countries of all their natural resources. These countries, Congo in particular, are becoming unlivable. The South American countries, Bolivia, are becoming unlivable because global multinationals, while they are organizing all kinds of festivals and marches and protests in the countries of the center, they turn the Congolese rainforests unlivable. And these global multinationals who are at every Pride march and every humanitarian event, they are blocking action against planned obsolescence. If we're talking about global migration, and I'm not talking about refugees only, if this is free, let's see what's going to happen. There are failed states. We don't know how they will ever get back into normal states. But how will this impact wages? How will this impact wages in the countries of the center, for example? I fear that if we go into this one-way street, if we use the liberalist terms about the global migratory crisis, then we will end up losing the ground in the global labor movement, and the wage fight will be lost. And I would like to highlight again that acting against inhumane treatment and xenophobic treatment is a point on which we all agree. Thank you. Excellent. Now, those 4 people who wanted to speak, you have the floor, but I repeat that we have not much time left. Please don't hold the mic for 10 minutes. We have 4 people who all want to express themselves. I would like to ask you to speak for 3 minutes maximum. Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Cséplő. I am the president of the Ferencváros organization of the Hungarian Social Democratic Party. Thank you very much for having organized this conference. So I'd like to start right away. I think Orbán is a fascist. Let me bring an example. In Hungary, religious schools get 3.14 times more funding than state schools. What does this mean? A Roma family or a Jewish family will have to bring their children into a Catholic school or Protestant school because that's where the good education is, and that's where you will not meet poor people, Roma people, Jewish people. So our society is divided. This is unacceptable. The same funding should be given to state schools as what the religious schools are receiving, because this is a state-level segregation. I go very often to the north of Hungary, to very poor villages, and what I hear is that in state-held schools, it's very difficult to have proper access to education. So these are basically segregated schools for the poor. And the church-held schools are kept for the rich classes, those who can actually send their children into a better education institution. I think that this is fascism, and if we go even further, we also say that in Hungary, the different educational, cultural institutions, resources are being reorganized into state-held or privately held associations or foundations. How can such a thing happen? How can it happen that in Budapest there are fascist events? The answer is that we see no trace of solidarity. Last time with Attila, when we spoke, we met at we went to a Horthy commemoration. We were 3 or 4 of us protesting this event, and we see that the Hungarian society has lost the will to stand up for rights that are ours. I think that after the Second World War, this couldn't have happened. War criminals couldn't have been celebrated at several events by fascist crowds. So I am very happy that we started talking about the question of setting up a free university, Sunday school, that we start educating youth. I'm very happy to see young people among ourselves, and I think that this is the way, and we should keep doing this, and we should fight fascism together. Next question, next comment, please. I see that many of you are asking for the floor, but unfortunately, we don't have time. We simply don't have time. At 3, our time will be up. If we could stay longer, we would be happy to give you the microphone. But unfortunately, if your colleagues are not respecting the 3-minute limitation, I can't do anything about that. So I'm asking if we can keep this up. So now I will keep giving the floor to the public, and then the panelists will have the time to respond. Now we have 2 more people who have been asking for the microphone and the floor for a while, and then I close the question and answer session. Yes, we have 8 more people who want to hold the floor. My name is Kristina. I am a teacher. Károly György, I was very happy to see you. I'm not sure if you're still here. Okay, he's not here anymore. I think it's very important that when you leave this table, you need to reinforce cooperation with trade unions in the fight against fascism and Nazism. And I think this has to be an important point in our action plan. In Hungary, we are receiving many, many refugees, and not only refugees, but also migrants from different countries with different religions, different skin color, different traditions, as legal, basically people who are legally in Hungary and they want to work here. They are migratory workers, basically. They are also targets and victims of xenophobia as refugees. There are Turkish, Serbian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Tunisian, Algerian people working in Hungary, and they are basically used as target practice for the fascist, xenophobic expressions of hate. When we're talking about wages, we're talking about jobs. Even the left-wing opposition is talking about Hungarian jobs for Hungarian people, Hungarian workers, good wages for the Hungarian workers. So what they actually pinpointed was that the migrant workers are taking jobs from us, and this is why our wages are low. So I think that we should organize ourselves together with the trade unions to provide the right level of wages for everyone who works in Hungary.
Corbyn, mainly. I worked at the Ukrainian border here in Hungary, so I saw the desperation and misery that you were talking about. But my question is regarding those people. If you're saying that they will be nursing us, they will be the one working for the NHS, what will happen to the country where they came from? Who will nurse them? And how about the education system that charges £10,000 a month so people can study medicine, and then their starting wage and the junior doctor's wage and nurse's wage are worse than what a parking meter earns in the car park? How about that issue that we need to sort out urgently, because these are issues that are affecting all of us and it's affecting the countries where those people are coming from. The other thing, you mentioned feminism, and everyone talks about feminism, but what happens when we can't even define what a woman is? And this is currently the issue with the Labour Party, and this is the issue that Rosie Duffield is facing, that she needs to unite with the Conservatives because there is no consensus over terminology and words, and people are using language to basically obfuscate language, and it's making it difficult for people who are immigrating as well to understand it, because so many words are illegible in languages like Hungarian. There's no pronoun. So how do we? So why do we need to make language impossible? So this is actually, I think, what is helping fascism and what is dividing people and what is actually helping conservatives and fascist movements to rise.
I want to address Remy too. So you are talking about that we have to go out and address other people's. Meanwhile, we are in a 3-star hotel serving food which I can't afford in my everydays, because I have to choose as a 27 years old to choose between housing, saving for a house, a flat, and choosing between a lifestyle which is buying groceries. And it's fucked up, I think, but meanwhile I see that the left is not talking about this. We are talking about fascism, yeah, and I'm an anti-fascist too. I am participating in gatherings in February against the fascists. I know Attila from there too. But the fascists are in the pubs. They are in the Hungarian rock music. They are out in the streets. And meanwhile, the Hungarian left, and as I see now the left in Europe, it's enclosed in these spaces. And I don't know why and how want to fight against fascism, which is with the people, which is inside in the people's minds. And we are talking about NATO and other things which are so fucking much away from the everyday people, from me, from my fellow mates in the work. And I don't know how will we reach a point where we can address the people, where we can address these problems properly, because I'm happy to read Rosa Luxemburg and want to participate in these gatherings. But if this is our only way to talk with each other, then I think we are doomed, because this is not how we will take over the world. Yeah, thanks.
Mientras que el compañero viene a...
Until the next question asker is here, I just want to add that whatever you say, that yes, we are working on that because we are in government, and if we did have the 20% of votes and then we are in power, then we can work on these issues. So I think that's another question to ask. How can we become a governing force in a country and then have an impact on minimum wage and the price of vegetables, etc.? Thank you. I have two comments. They I often say that whenever you are in doubt, go back to the basics. And one of the basics is Lenin, who says that when bourgeoisie is too much in settle and too much feeling the power, then they introduce they actually introduce a system in which they put from one hand something into the other hand. So, but at the same time, it's also a green lighting fascism for them. So it's also, if we see the rise of fascism, see the rise of fascism, it's also the weakening of bourgeoisie, of the bourgeois state. Another thing I wanted to say is the Sunday school. It's something that when Tamás Kraus organized this in the 1990s, the way it worked is that in the morning from 10 to 12, they invited some known intellectual who came for free, and gave a lecture. In the afternoon, they had university lectures held by actual university professors who were giving lectures for free, and it's been working for 10 years, and I know because I've been the president of this Sunday school for the last time. And I think this would be something that would work today as well, because I know university professors who would be willing to give lectures for free, sacrificing their Sundays. The only reason it was cancelled is the venue. There is no place for us to hold these meetings. We need a place. We need to pay for the room. And we don't have money, so that's why we don't have the Sunday schools anymore. But I know that there are people here in the audience who would be happy to jump on board and give free lectures if we revive this Sunday school. And I think even the legal framework would be also there. So I think it's only the will that is necessary for that, to revive our Sunday school. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I would like to greet all my former colleagues. I'm Attila Zafi. I was a member of the Socialist Party. We've been working together with DB Sanyi, and I would like to welcome comrades Walter and Jeremy as well. I tried to talk to them in during lunch break about the events in February. I was one of the people who were put on this list with my picture and with my personal data. I was the one who reported this to the police. I was the one who wrote the letter to the Ministry of Interior, which prompted this investigation. And it turned out from this investigation that the listing leftist and anti-fascist people was a current practice there, and I think Attila and me were the very few who had the courage to step up. And maybe you don't know, maybe Walter, you don't know either, that my family have been working on the construction, building Hungarian politics since the 1950s. They've been educating and shaping big figures in the left, like Minister Németh, Péter Medgyessy, and many other big figures. And when I saw my picture on the website, I was surprised. Am I a leftist terrorist and all the other insults? But this is the situation in Hungary currently, and I think we should take this up to an international level, because it is in Hungary, it is the Ministry of Interior who were working on this. There was someone from the anti-terrorist agency who was denying these allegations, but now, thanks to the investigation, we know that he was involved, and there will be consequences. Thank you. I think everybody is getting more and more tired, including me. I was asked by Attila to join this conference and to say a few words about what we were discussing. My name is Szilárd Kalmár. I work as a social worker, but I'm also a leftist public author, so to say. I'm much more comfortable when I write than when I speak, but I will try to keep my 3-minute time limit and share my thought. Comrade Jeremy Corbyn talked about his preoccupations about what will happen in the United Kingdom, about in the healthcare, and who will nurse our elderly, and we are very worried as well, because most of my colleagues, social worker colleagues, work now in Western Europe, in healthcare, in social working, in other spheres. There is about 50% of my cousins and my colleagues and my friends who are in Western European countries, in Spain, in Ireland, in the UK, and I think that social disparities have not been balanced. There are, and there is actually what we've seen all over in Europe is actually it's authoritarian regimes that have grabbed the power and typically funded by European Union money. They orchestrate their way so that they can stay in power. This is the Victory Day. I have this St. George ribbon that I have. It's in Russia and in the eastern countries. It's a symbol of victory. It's the 9th of May where we celebrate this day. And I think we can, just to commemorate, just in a sentence, to commemorate them, because it was actually a time zone difference that the Day of Victory is celebrated on 2 different days, the 8th and the 9th of May. I don't want to be too sarcastic, but the British and American soldiers would still be sunbathing on Omaha beaches if it weren't for the soldiers of the Soviet Union, if there are not the communist Yugoslavian partisans, the Greek communists, the Chinese communists, and I could go on. Robert Capa had a famous saying that I've been facing off Nazis and fascists in many countries, and whenever there was war, there were people in planes with small red stars on it, and they defeated the Nazis everywhere. And I think this is important, and I want to join Tibor Sanyi in this. Let's just say it, that basically fascism and Nazism is the opposite, the adversary of fascism and Nazism is communism, and it's always been like that. From Spain, starting from Spain, going even into the second half of the 20th century. Just think about Greece, we know about the descendants of Greek communist partisans who are not very fond of British foreign policies of the day. Anyway, I think we should still commemorate them. I think this is also the way how I arrived to the point where in the village where I live, there were 100 people who died as a Soviet soldier in battle against German and Hungarian Nazis. 70 of them were Ukrainians. And a couple of years ago, I was still there on commemorations where Ukrainian state was present there, and they were commemorating these liberating soldiers, and they were proud to commemorate this liberating war. But after 2014, it's a turning point in Ukrainian politics, which instead of the Ukrainian liberating soldiers, started to rather venerate the openly Nazi Azovist monsters and banderists who were terrorizing the populations and their political elite. And we have to admit, we have to recognize that behind this extremist and American, Atlantist, imperialist thinking is what is behind all this. And I think that one of the main domain of European anti-fascist fight should be the aim to liberate Europe from the murderous and harmful American way of thinking, which is infesting our everyday life. Now I will give the floor to our panelists, and now we will go in a reverse order. So first I give the floor to Tibor, then Attila, then Eleonora, and lastly Jeremy. So Tibor, you have the floor. Or Attila, you want to add something? Or I'm just a moderator, so you have the right to switch the order. I'm not giving orders. We said with Tibor that we would like to give the opportunity for our foreign friends to express themselves, because on our part we are very happy and we're enjoying your company. We can still talk about this later on in the upcoming week.
I will try to be very, very quick. The first point for me is the migration issue. During the 60s and the 70s in Italy, many people from the southern Italy went to northern Italy to find a job. They were represented as terroni from the from people of northern Italy. And they were accused of provoking a decrease of the wages for northern people, which is the solution, which was the solution for us, to block southern people, southern workers in their country, or unite workers for increasing all the salaries. I think that the Marx answer is workers of the world unite. And outside of unifying of the workers of all over the world, there is just a right answer to the problem of low salaries. This is my opinion. And we speak about crisis. I think that migration is a human right. Migration is a human right. And we must defend the human right that is linked to human evolution from Australopithecus to Homo sapiens sapiens. Migration is on the basis of the human evolution. 25,000 people died in the Mediterranean route since 2014. The solution is help them to their houses, Italian first, Hungarian first, Spanish first, or let's find a solution unifying workers. I think that we have just one answer. Otherwise, we give feed to right-wings, far-right arguments. Second problem, yes, and of course, we can consider Marx a globalist, if you want, because he was speaking to the workers all over the world. Last thing I want to say is that in Italy, very, very often a criticism against Meloni is that she's an ally of Orban, and so Orban refuses migrant policies, and so this creates problems to Italy because there is no redistribution of migrant people. I think that we have the instrument with proposing European asylum, proposing a European minimum wage to destroy the consensus both of Meloni and Orban. Otherwise, we are divided between ourselves. Last thing I want to say is this. About the speech of the last comrade. I think that the 9th of May victory is our victory. It's a victory against Nazi fascism. And I think that we must fight to restore the 9th of May as a European celebration for this reason. In Italy, Rosso and Russo are very similar words, red and Russian. And very often, the Putin army, the Russian army, is called the Soviet army, the Red Army. I think that we have to make our celebration the 9th of May, but we must have very clear that Putin is nothing to do with was the communist liberation contribution to the communist contribution to the liberation of Europe from Nazi fascism.
Thank you. I just want to say that Vilmos Honti just arrived. He's the president of the Association of Resistance and Anti-Fascism. So I just wanted to greet him and give back the floor to Jeremy.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief because I spoke for too long in the earlier session, for which I apologise. First of all, on the question of the 9th of May and the celebration of victory over the Nazis in 1945, I think it's one that should be celebrated all across Europe. I fully recognise that the defeat of the Nazis in Western Europe was only possible because of the sacrifices made by people all over Eastern Europe in fighting against the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union at that time. I fully recognise that. And actually, many people in Britain, when they think about the origins of the Second World War and the conduct of it, fully understand that as well. Surely the significance of the Second World War was that the USA, Britain, France and the Soviet Union came together as an alliance against the Nazis. The tragedy of the Second World War was that whilst the Nazis had been defeated, Nazi ideology was not defeated everywhere, and that the Western countries, Britain, France and the Netherlands in particular, did not see the end of the Second World War and the liberation of Europe from Nazism as what it should have been, the opportunity to liberate those people living in the European colonies from their colonial masters. Instead, Britain, France and the Netherlands sent troops to Southeast Asia to repress the Viet Minh, at that time fighting for their independence, and the people in Malaya and in Indonesia as well. And that's why the understanding of history is so important. And so I don't want to make history boring for our young people in school. I want them to see figures who were, in my view, heroic for what they achieved at that time and take the issue forward. Often history is made popular when told through the prism and the eyes of those people that led the fight against it. Is the interest in the risings in the United States in the 1950s against racism in the southern states interesting because it was a campaign for a civil rights law? Or is it interesting because it was the rise of Martin Luther King and what he achieved in it? So young people can relate to the life of Martin Luther King in a way they can't necessarily relate to the sort of rather arcane discussion about how a law came about. And so it is about making our campaigns popular. In the this is going to date me a bit, but in the 1970s, there was a big rise in far-right activities in Britain. The origins of Oswald Mosley and the fascists suddenly rose up again, and the most disgusting racism that had already been carried out against black people and Irish people and people of Asian origin in Britain became worse. The National Front was a regurgitation of the Nazis. I'm not saying they've totally gone away or been defeated, but we did it by popular activities, massive music against racism festivals, art against racism, popular activities against racism. So we had tens of thousands of people on the streets for music against fascists and things like that. Make it interesting, make it popular, and then you'll begin to get an audience for the political arguments that you wish to put forward. And so it is about those, the way in which we fight against it. So it's not, and I take your point, about us going into a little room on our own and making ourselves feel good. It's got to be about linking the issues together. Now, we had a lot of industrial disputes in my country over the past few months, and indeed they're still going on, about wage levels for teachers, wage levels for nurses, for railway workers, for civil servants, and many, many other groups of people have basically seen their living standards fall over the past 10 years. But on all the demonstrations, they've been huge. We've been joined by people campaigning for the rights of migrant workers to be able to work and be properly paid for working, and for those people that are desperate to get somewhere decent to live. In other words, they're linking the issues together. And our campaign is about decent pay for all, and a decent minimum wage of, in our case, £15 per hour is what we are demanding. And so the argument that migrant workers depress wages is not true. What depresses wages is a system that allows employers to exploit people and then blame them for being exploited. Surely it is about giving decent pay and conditions for all workers. And if we go into a struggle only supporting workers of a certain type, certain ethnic group or origin, then we divide our society, we don't unite our society. I represent an inner city community in Parliament, Islington North. You'll probably know it from where the Arsenal Stadium is and Finsbury Park and where I live, those kind of places. There are 70 different languages spoken in my community. There are people from all over the world who've made their homes in my community. I'm proud to represent them all. Our whole political purpose is uniting those people for decent housing, decent jobs, decent conditions, and proper funding of our public services. I grew up in a country that had free healthcare, free education, and access to housing for all. We no longer have free education. Anyone going to university in my country has to pay £9,000 per year in tuition fees. I was in Parliament when those tuition fees were first introduced, £1,000 a year. And the leader of our party at that time, Tony Blair, said, well, you can vote for this, it's only £1,000 a year. I said, no, it's a principle you're crossing. You're crossing the principle of free education, and it's not going to stop at £1,000. And where was I wrong? It's now £9,000 and likely to go up to £12,000 a year, meaning working class children cannot go to university, or those that do have a debt for the rest of their lives of 50, 70, £100,000 debt merely for going to university. So, and they told me at the time when I said, well, I'm not voting for this nonsense, I'm absolutely going to vote against it. Whatever threats you make to me, whatever you say, I'm voting against it. Because I had the right of free education, I want my children and their friends to have the right of free education as well. And they said, well, how would you pay for it? I said, taxation. Why have we reduced the tax burden for the very richest people in our society? Tax the wealthy, redistribute power and wealth. It's a political issue you have to confront. Because if you don't confront it, and we go into government on the left, we end up carrying out the agenda which protects the unequal distribution of wealth and power within our society. So I'm passionate that we give education for all. Your point is a very good one about migrant workers. Now, well done for your work on the border of Ukraine. First off, the Russian invasion is completely wrong. It's totally wrong and must be absolutely condemned. And we have to support a process that stops the fighting and brings about some kind of peace process. And whilst I welcome the support given to Ukrainian refugees all over Europe, and those that come to my country are made very welcome, all given immediately the right to work, housing, healthcare, good. It should apply to all refugees. That's my opinion, otherwise it becomes very divisive. But your point about taking skilled workers out of poor countries is a fair one. We have large numbers of doctors who come from India, come from Central African countries and Latin America. And I've been in Angola, for example, where I met the only doctors in the hospitals when I was there were from Médecins Sans Frontières, and all those that had qualified in medicine in Angola had used their skills to go elsewhere and be better paid than they would be in Angola. Surely the answer to that is to ensure Angola is in a position to pay its doctors properly, so that we don't. I don't want our health service to run on the basis of taking people away from somebody else's health service, and that means proper payment of people and giving them the right to work. We have the utter stupidity in my country of qualified doctors who've come to seek asylum because of repression in their own societies on human rights and social grounds, who are not allowed to work and are living in desperate poverty when they're ready to work. It's absurd when we have a shortage of doctors and nurses. And so it is important that we relate all the anti-racist campaigning to uniting people together, not allowing right-wing economic arguments to divide people, and that in turn gives space for the far right to say, well, these people are taking our jobs, these people are taking our services. It's about sharing wealth and power. And the last point I'd make is the point you made about the trans debate that goes on in Britain. I hear the debate all the time, obviously. I think we just have to recognise trans rights are a human right as well. So base it on the principles of observation of the human rights of all of us, to live in a society where we respect each other's right, respect each other's identity, and respect each other's choice in the way that they express themselves. It is about bringing people together. It's very easy politically to divide people. You can always decide there's a minority you don't like. That's what the Nazis did. It could be somebody else. It could be LGBT. It could be all kinds of people. Very, very easy to gain power on the basis of dividing people. But once you've let that tiger out of the cage, it's not going back in. You've then got some other group you've got to demonise, some other group you've got to attack. And we all end up with a horrible, divided, racist society. Who benefits from that? The super rich, whose power, wealth and control has not been challenged. It's all about social justice, ultimately, and understanding of the history of this world and what brings us together in that wonderful cultural mosaic that we all are. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos y a todas. Gracias.
Thank you for everyone, the comments and the speeches. Thank you for the speakers, and thanks to our audience. Thanks to the interpreters as well for their work. I think they were under quite some pressure because we all wanted to say so much in such short time. Thank you. We will continue next time.